My success in sport really enabled me to get the position at the US Olympic Paralympic Committee. I got to set up Olympic and Paralympic training sites around the country and learn so much about, people's capacity for learning, developing, playing sport, whatever their ability or disability is. Research I did at the USOPC talked about that. That number one reason why people stayed in sport and helped them succeed was the enjoyment of competition, the fun of the sport. The most successful athletes were how they first played was a fun family activity, or a pickup game, or just, it was more the joy of activity. I didn't really stress is when young people are participating in activity and sport, it's a wonderful opportunity to learn something that you can play for your life. To me, there's a sport and activity for everyone, whether they think they're athletic or sporty or not. And it's the things I learned in sport about speaking up. Sport taught me that. I've always been like that for people that are underrepresented or their voice is not in the room.
We head into the Olympics. You have talked about actually Radisha and what she's done at Adeleke for Irish athletics.
What an incredible role model. I just sort of tear up when I think about, the negative things that have been said, which is really disappointing and very sad, just inappropriate things when this young woman has lifted a nation. If she wins a medal, doesn't win a medal, the fact that she is representing Ireland and is in the highest level of the toughest sport is incredible.
Before we start, thank you for all the DMs and great feedback on Kuul Conversations, which I love to hear, so keep it coming. And what would help us even more is if you choose to subscribe. It helps me to bring you more amazing guests and Kuul Conversations. Now let's dive into the episode. Today's guest on Kuul Conversations is widely known in the sport of squash and is one of the greatest players ever, but who has also had an incredible impact on shaping sports in the United States for future generations. Alicia McConnell's athletic career is phenomenal. One of the most decorated US squash players in history, representing the US 6 times in the World Championships. Post her elite playing career, Alicia transitioned into coaching and shaping sports in the United States as the Director of Training Sites and Community Partnerships with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. She's one of the most authoritative figures on young athlete development and opening up pathways so more kids can enjoy being active and playing sports. She authored the Youth Sports Development Strategy for the USOPC, as well as broadened the scope of athlete services, particularly in transitioning from sport into the working world. She initiated the USOPC and NGB Young Professional Mentor Network and launched their LGBTQ Employee Service Group. Now consulting in the Irish sports ecosystem, developing diversity and inclusion criteria, I'm thrilled to have this conversation with Alicia, who continues to give so much back to the sports world to make it better for the next generation. Alicia, so great to have you on Kuul Conversations. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, well, I don't know who you were introducing there, but sounds pretty good. So, and have to thank you for everything you're doing, bringing back the conversations to physical literacy, because that's really where the journey starts for people to be active when they're young. And the data shows that that's what keeps people active. If they develop some motor skills as a young person, they feel much more confident and comfortable just participating in activity or sport. And some may move on to competitive sport, but ultimately it's just trying to keep people active and healthy. So thanks for being able to chat today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And I'm curious then, working with at the higher end of sport, why is it so crucial for kids today to be active from a young age?
Yeah, well, what we see at so many levels, when someone isn't active as a young person, they don't become as what we'd call athletic. So it's much harder to play sport. And if you're not really engaged, or picked on a team, or meet friends through sports. It's really something that I think you can miss out on in life. I mean, it really is important because it becomes an activity that teaches you life skills, being able to kick the goal, shoot the basket. And it's also a wonderful family activity. I was lucky. My family like my mom used to get up in the morning before work and go for a run. And, that was before all the fancy running shoes were available. And, seeing your family members participate in sport and being active, I think helps kids. You see it as something, fun and enjoyable, as opposed to, oh, I have to work out.
That piece around fun and enjoyment, there's so much research for kids that that is a critical component in their early stage exposure to activity, movement, and even sport. And it's also the number one factor that kids, particularly under the age of 12, drop out of sport. What have you seen from your extensive career at all levels, from grassroots to the upper ends? What have you seen, and where are we at today?
Yeah. No, it is. And even some of the research I did at the USOPC talked about, many of the most successful athletes were how they first played was a fun family activity, or a pickup game, or just it was more the joy of activity, as opposed to, I think, when we moved to the idea of why kids are dropping out at that particular age group, particularly girls. I think then we get into this whole socialization and stereotypes and what's expected from boys or what's expected from girls. And of course, today there's more discussion on people being more non-binary or gender fluid, that don't want to fit in particular boy or girl labels. But I think what happens is, if sport gets really serious when you're really young, for some, that's definitely an area where they want to drop out, because sometimes sports attire, particularly for girls, can be very tight. It's very, that's a piece that we don't always talk about. Sometimes it's your coach, it's your peers. If you go to a school and you're playing school sports at a young age, and girls and boys are both, and everyone's supported and having fun and people are cheering you on, that's much more engaging than, if there's a cheerleading team for the boys team and then the women go play and there's no one that, or the girls might think that as well, I'm not being supportive and I don't feel as cool or as popular if I play sport. And unfortunately, that's still happening, not as much, because now obviously we've all seen this incredible fan base grow for women's sports, because I think people are realizing it's incredible. It's much more skill based. Sometimes men can be stronger or more powerful or jump higher, but so women, sometimes the skill level has to be that much better. So every sport's struggling with the dropout rate, but I think the fun is a huge piece, but even more so, it's the social piece. If a young person gets to expand their social circle and feel more included in that they belong in the social circle, they're more likely to stay. So for instance, like if a girl all of a sudden is playing on our volleyball team and, those really little shorts, maybe they're too uncomfortable, maybe she's a little bit bigger of a girl, and people make comments, the likelihood is she might drop out. She might not. She might say, well, I feel good about my body, and I don't have to, maybe I don't have to wear this. Could I wear longer shorts in this sport? But also, if she's supported by her family, again, her peers, if the coach is really positive and not always about winning, that can be a factor too, because sometimes, there's pressure on coaches to win at school teams. And then the US, there's the travel team piece. In Ireland, in Europe, you don't have as much of that as the States. But most countries, it's still elevating into this, okay, you have to win. So there's loads of different thoughts on the dropout rate. But I think that, the conversation around Sport and Society. It's a great book by Jay Coakley. Talks about the importance of young people. It expands their social circle. They'll probably stick with it.
Yeah,
So
that's a really important piece, and at least what we're seeing on the ground as well is post COVID, where social connection was somewhat distorted for kids for prior years, that it's almost become, like you said, like such a critical component, and that piece around
yeah,
inclusion, that all kids feel included, and especially some of the kids that we see, you know the idea of winning, like you talked about, and kids having athletic ability. There are a lot of kids maybe who maybe are labeled maybe not coordinated or not athletic or not sporty. And so those kind of kids get a little excluded by those labels and even deemed lazy at times. And so that becomes a
mm,
barrier to
mm,
inclusion. How have you seen that, or have you seen any ways
mm.
that we can create those types of environments to support these kids?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a lot more sports, I think, globally that are looking at virtual sport. So, with the idea of if someone can sort of see it virtually in the beginning, can it move to the physical
Right.
engagement? And again, I think the fun piece, I mean, there's also, if we look at esports, now a lot of esports is watching
Right.
sports. So, people playing on their computers. So I'd love to see that move from I can engage in this form of play on the computer, but can I move to more of a physical activity? And the reason I'm specifically saying the word activity as opposed to sport is a lot of times if you don't really fit into that sporting culture, sometimes those kids, they're going to love like the BMX bike, the skateboard, climbing, ultimate frisbee. Just what's really key about a lot of those sports is it's a lot more freestyle. Your parents aren't necessarily there telling you what you're supposed to do or going to the game and, oh, you should have hit this goal or could have done that, and as well as coaching. Sometimes people say that. So I think when you have more independence, because you're going to have extroverted kids, more introverted, and so if you can get more of those introverts to play some of those singular sports, the data shows that you get to make the decisions when you're on your BMX bike, skateboarding, climbing. You get to sort of choose. Frisbee. A lot of those sports have increased in popularity as well, and or just going for a run or a walk in your own time, and creating your own form of play. There's so many interesting activities that are being created in different countries that aren't mainstream but have a huge following. So
That's so fascinating. And it sounds like that broadening of the definition of traditional sports and recognizing that movement is core to a lot of activities. And that gives so many kids so many other opportunities in a way to express themselves through movement. And like you talked about
yeah,
the
yeah,
BMX, it sounds like the creativity of that and the freestyle aspect can really appeal to some kids that, given the opportunity and in developing their physical literacy early on, but given the opportunity and exposure to those could really be a game changer for them.
yeah. And in Ireland, the GAA, and of course last weekend was an amazing performance of um, the finals, and it's such athleticism being played. And so when you have young athletes in Ireland, many of which high percentage join their local GAA, there's a pitch in every community. um, they're very athletic, so it's running, it's jumping, it's throwing, it's hitting, it's learning a lot of those motor skill developments in the GAA. And then kids often go off and do different types of activities or sports. But to me, in Ireland, I think that's a really good example, because ultimately, if you look at the percentage, it's a pretty strong percentage of people who are active in Ireland. Although, of course, you always want more people to be active. And then for the country this size, sending 133 athletes to the Olympics, which start on Friday, is incredible. And also in terms of a really strong Paralympic team.
You have that unique perspective because you've have an extensive career and grown up in the US ecosystem and now in Ireland. When you look to the US youth sports ecosystem, is there anything comparable there?
More so in the US, I think sport has become, it's where you live and grow up as what your opportunities will be. So the more athleticism that people often grow up with, no matter where you grow up, is there's often parks and recreation or community centers that have basketball courts, or you go, hit some balls or play catch around baseball or throw a football. So American football. So some of those sort of base sports. But what's happening is the around equity is not really there. It's becoming much more expensive to play sports, even in school, having to fund, getting your equipment and things like that. And again, that's a global issue. But ultimately, there's the good thing about the US is there's a lot more focus on trying to get more kids active in underrepresented areas. So there's more foundations putting funding into it. And as you know, Aspen Institute, Project Play has highlighted many of those stories. That's a key factor, is to me, of keeping people involved, despite the cost of sport, is those private public partnerships where you have, whether it's foundations, corporations, private funding coming in, as well as, parks and rec or donated land or buildings, and coming together, trying to keep the cost low for kids to play. So it's a real key area right now, accessibility. And if I can say one thing, I think that would be incredible if we could do globally, but I'll focus on the States in particular, is if we think about the amazing facilities we have all over the United States, the best facilities in the world, and other countries have amazing facilities too, but in the States, how can we make some of those facilities more accessible? So for instance, at the end of the day, the local high school, everything shuts down and closes. Doors are locked, gyms are closed, whatever other facilities are. Now, I know they're wonderful facilities for those kids attending that school, but are there community programs or community initiatives, chair yoga or Pilates, men's Pilates at the end of the day? Could more community facilities be open for more of the community? And even universities. And I know, for instance, one of the facilities, part of AEG Sports out in LA, it'll be one of the facilities. I think it's called the Dignity Sports Facility. That's the new sponsor, I think. But they open their facilities so people can use the facilities. They can walk around the campus. I think that's key, so that communities have places to be active, because if there's more partnerships there, people have amazing facilities to use. And even like my sport of squash, a lot of people learned back in the day. Now it's very popular in the US, and we're very successful. The women's junior team just got to the final of the World Championships, which is in Houston as we speak. A lot of people were able to play at university because they had access to these courts because they were free. So somehow figuring out, how do we make sport more affordable to everyone? Because right now it's when schools, universities, and private facilities, only certain people can use. If you can't afford certain sports, your chances are you're not going to participate in those, and don't feel included. So,
and it's the idea of these public-private partnerships that you talk about as a way forward was something actually in a conversation on a recent episode with Emma Zwiebler for the World Federation of the Sporting Goods Industry. And their
Mm.
call to action for exactly that as well, in terms of, core key stakeholders coming together, where you have the programming, the facilities, because this affects everybody's bottom line, is, whether it's kids or adults not being active enough or not playing sports and not being involved. So it sounds like, you've brought and added more color to that, and how we can engage parks and recs and, universities and educational institutions within the community
Mm.
to provide
Mm.
access.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting, over the years, there's been so many things that we've done with communities. For instance, it might have seen like a different approach, but what was amazing, when we were working with the Boys and Girls Clubs in Atlanta, they were able to get a grant from the Atlanta Falcons. So here's a football program. And what they were funding was Boys and Girls Clubs, trying to get them to learn to swim. So it doesn't have to be the same sport either, because again, as we know in America, children of color drown about 4 times the amount of white kids. So it's a really important issue that young kids of color learn to swim, particularly Black children. So that partnership was amazing. Another one that I thought was really important. Like, if we look at schools, there was an initiative with San Antonio Sports, where the program that we were working with them on, they instituted homework for the kids, that they would have to walk a mile with their parents. To me, it's those collaborations. If we each try to do things on our own, it becomes too expensive or too hard administratively. So if we can all work together to create more of these initiatives, like Under Armour in Baltimore, built an amazing facility in one of the poorest areas of Baltimore, that they started doing more sort of educational opportunities for kids, and their reward was to play sport. But what happened was, they realized that the parents started coming in asking for a little bit more help, whether it was speaking English, or getting some of their, getting a driver's license, or just some basic day-to-day things. And so all of a sudden they expanded to, okay, well, now we're helping the whole family, whether it's literacy or other initiatives. And it helps the whole community. So, it can start with activity, but all of a sudden, that helps the whole family just have a better quality of life.
And it's fascinating because from what I've come to learn and understand about the US, is there's this really broad spectrum. So we've talked about, access at one end, and then we have another end of the sport, which the conversation is actually more around, well, sports specialization. It's a very hot topic right now, and often driven by parents and these for-profit sports providers. So like, you might have, like, a parent or a caregiver that says, my 8-year-old kid, like soccer or basketball or lacrosse, and how do I get them into college? How do I get them an NCAA scholarship, or to be a future Olympian? You deeply understand this space, working at the Olympic level, being an athlete yourself. What would you say to parents who are thinking that mindset? Like, what should they be prioritizing for their child in terms of their development?
Having been a national coach, I've seen and worked with athletes who, they thought they really wanted to play at university, but I've had kids that were very good, but dropped out. Have them be a multi-sport athlete. That is going to bring so much more joy than getting into a certain university or getting a certain result in a certain sport. If you're forced to play a sport, chances are that young person is going to drop out of sport. Now, sports specialization, there's certain sports that today the environment is so competitive that, to be the best in the world, many top athletes go to university, not all of them, depending, if you look at gymnastics, you start so young, or tennis or figure skating, there's other sports there too. But we're lucky in the US to have the NCAA. It's an incredible system of sport development. And the way you're part of a team, and you're proud of being part of that team, and that experience is incredible. And there's a lot of people that walk on and can make a team. But often if you look at how much money people could spend on the cost of a specific sport to try to get a college scholarship for their child, they're going to spend, maybe just as much. And I know the cost um, of going to university in the States just continues it's an enormous cost.
Yeah.
And ultimately, whatever school they go to, whether or not they get a scholarship, there will be club teams that they can play. So the number one is that they enjoy the sport and they're getting, a lot of reward from it. If it's not fun and if they have issues with injuries and, maybe let them experiment with different sports. Again, the research I did at the USOPC talked about that. That number one reason why people stayed in sport and helped them succeed was the enjoyment of competition, the fun of the sport. So I think that's a big piece of it.
Do you think, when you look back on your work in the USOPC but particularly also your coaching, I mean, you've extensive coaching experience. When you look at best practices or coaching experience, when we think about kids, particularly 6, 7, and 8, and there's been some recent articles, I know the Aspen Institute have highlighted these about the intensity of competition for 6-year-olds, I think it was in Texas. What is your sense of, or how would you be able to guide parents maybe what to look for, but also maybe coaches who are giving their time on the ground?
Absolutely. One of the things that it's difficult in this debate in sport, I guess I use the word debate because, there's so many pieces to the puzzle. It's that you have your national governing body, the organization that sort of sets the rules and the competitions, parents getting kids to events and trying to support their kids, but not always knowing what's best. And often parents are asked to coach, and some sports require a level 1 certification. And of course, now a lot more safeguarding, which is wonderful. So there's all these pressures on parents today, and coaches and teachers in school, because sometimes when you're playing sport, Johnny or Jane has to leave early because they have a competition. Now, when we get to the 6 to 8-year-olds, I don't think there should be competition at those ages. I mean, that's just a no to me. Some more fun competition, like when you see young ones where a football helmet can barely, stay on their head. Contact football at that age, I think is a little too much. Now, this gets us into the other debate. Sports creates a lot of revenue. Now, sometimes it's for the best efforts, but sometimes maybe it isn't. And I think we have to get away from too much competition and too much intensity too young. The idea of young kids, like, you need to learn how to fail. You need to learn to lose. If you take risk, you're going to make mistakes. But that's what you're supposed to do when you're young. You're supposed to make mistakes. You're supposed to miss the catch, miss the hit, trip and fall. And we've seen that at the highest level of sport. It still happens. And people are, you feel bad, but ultimately we have to remember it is a sport. Now, this is coming from someone myself who I was never a good loser. I mean, I'm older now. I can sort of handle it now. But it's, I didn't really learn to lose well. I didn't really learn to fail. So from my own experience, that took me longer, like an emotional maturity. Sport, sometimes when you succeed and you're very intense and very competitive and you bring it into your life, that you need to learn to balance. And so sometimes for me, I was very much a perfectionist and I was very hard on myself. Like I've learned to be kinder and stuff, but I had to work on that. So I think starting that young is too much. Like when I was on the U.S. Squash Board of Directors and we were voting on whether to rank under 12s, I said no. Now that was under 12s. And so, but today, I mean, there's, I think I think under 12s is the youngest group.
Okay.
But many sports, if they start moving into that younger and younger level, I just think we're becoming too serious. And what is our purpose as a national governing body? Do we want to be that focused on competition and success in our minds, if we think is winning? What about a great example is, say, USA Hockey? Okay, so ice hockey in the US is huge. It's a one of our major NGBs. The success of hockey is incredible, particularly our women, which that's one of the wonderful things about the NCAA. We would have not have had such a strong Olympic team if we didn't have the NCAA program, which has expanded. But but getting back to the USA Hockey example, to the youngest group, maybe it is 6 to 8s, probably. So you have parents traveling to out of state competitions for their 8-year-old, and you'd play a game. And what they found is, on average, in a game, a kid would have the puck for maybe a minute or barely any time on the puck. So what they did is they changed the whole model. There was a lot of backlash, but the short story is they changed this whole model for young kids, and it became focused on skill development, not competition. So you're learning at your clubs. Each kid has a puck, and you do skill development, and you go cross the ice. You don't go long. For a young person, that is a massive distance. And playing games with such little time with the puck. So, and what happened was, all of a sudden, USA Hockey became the NGB in the US that had the highest percentage of new growth of new members, because a lot of sports, have been dipping in terms of their membership, which is a key indicator of their revenue, the membership base. But I have to just quickly say that ultimately, I ran a conference at the USOPC called the PLAYS Conference, and it was called Pipeline Leadership for America's Youth Sports. I wish I could keep doing that conference. Anyway, so we had the conference for a year, and at the time, and still, one of the major influencers in this space, his name is Istvan Bayi, and he created the Sport for Life model. And this is the model that we now talk about more, physical literacy. And it's not the triangle or the best go to the top and the bottom it's more of a rectangle where you want to keep people engaged their whole life, but they're just at different levels. So ran this conference, he spoke, we did loads of conversation around what are the best practices around youth sports. And the best thing was, a man from USA Hockey, Ken Martell, was there. He took the information from that, talked to Istvan Bayi. They created a new model, which was called the American Development Model, which now and then when hockey implemented it, then the USOPC decided to implement it. And this is something our department worked on with the research we did, as well as the PLAYS conference. And really, so they're growing this idea of it's participation, skill development, fun, engagement. It's not this competition right away. Because if I'm a kid and I'm with the puck and moving around, having fun, as opposed to playing a game, and you see these little ones, where goes the puck? And then they, like the soccer ball, they're all just like this mass moving around. What if they all had a ball and they're just going across the field, and then you do some engagement, maybe you do some fun games or kicking on goal or it. So I love the idea of cross training and I love throwing out different examples, because like in Utah, the US ski team, they always have their athletes try other sports. So you'd have the alpine team try something like ski jumping, but the really small jump, not the big jump. That would be too dangerous. Or before the Olympic Games, the wrestlers would come out on the field and play a game of soccer. Just you have to bring the lightness and the because it gets too serious. And we have to remember it is a sport, and for some it does become our livelihood as an athlete or a coach. And I know for me, when squash became my income, like my performance definitely dropped, because all of a sudden now, my expectations were higher, that perfectionism came in, and it was hard. It was hard. I mean, I think I had the skill and the talent, but not as much as the emotional maturity to deal with learning this new higher level of squash. And the US played a different game of squash, so I was trying to learn this new game. And anyway, the short story is, yeah, skill development, physical
Yeah.
literacy, motor skills as at the young age. Yeah.
That's a really interesting point then that you brought up about, you know, and we're seeing it, I think, earlier and earlier with athletes. You talked about your identity, the way our identity as athletes can very easily be fused. And that's even more challenging when kids are developing emotionally, for that
Yeah.
extra where their
Right.
identity becomes associated with being this standout athlete or a talented athlete in whatever way. Is that something you think,
Mm.
the USOPC, I mean, ultimately the USOPC is a talent, pipeline for the best. How do you navigate that?
Well, I think they're doing a much better job of focusing on, putting athletes first and trying to manage, um, or I should say, trying to have resources to be easily available for people if, they're having a hard time in sport or after sport. So I think there's much more resources there. If you get to sport at a high level, as certainly for myself, I was and I love the word you use, fused. I was squash. So if I had a good game, I was happy. If I didn't have a good game, I was not happy. And so my results determine how I felt about myself. And so that took time to sort of unwind and learn. And I think because that's part of what we love is, like Billie Jean King's book, Pressure is Privilege. What a different concept. Like, it's amazing what she did to, it with so much pressure, like women's sports on her shoulders when she beat Bobby Riggs. And to be able to see sport and playing sport in competition and the intensity of it as a privilege and an opportunity, as opposed to just living in this, oh my God, I have to win because then I'm okay person. If I lose, I'm no good. The black and white of it. And I think often in society, things become black and white. You're good or bad, you're gay or you're straight, you're black or you're white. Most of us are in the gray somewhere, and emotions are in the gray. And so you can be happy and sad at the same time. You can be joyous and frustrated at the same time. I mean, who knew? It took me a while to grow up. Maybe sports sometimes keeps that little kid in us as well, which is fun. You want to keep the playfulness in your daily life. Because the intensity I took to work, and then work became so intense, and so it's an important skill that I think sport can try to teach us if we don't get fully uh, enmeshed with what we think is success, which we think is winning. I thought was winning, whereas success is actually what amazing travel opportunities I had, the people I met, the things I learned, the things I saw. The opportunities that sport brought into my life were amazing.
Yeah.
So
It's really important actually for parents to realize that, if they have a child who's, very interested in sport, and just, recognizing that the pressures and maybe inadvertently, we want to support our kids, or we want to, as they're growing in their interest. And it's from someone who's at a player level, but also, that has worked with the best athletes, highlighting that it's an important consideration that can happen early, in a child's
yeah.
development.
Well, it's interesting too because my parents both worked. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. We grew up in an apartment. We were we were all super busy. When we had activities, we'd be playing outside until it got dark, and then you come home. But it was very different. Today's environment, parents have to know where their kids are 24/7. I mean, my parents didn't start coming to watch some of my squash. I think I was already number 2 in the country in women's squash.
Right.
So the junior events, unless the junior event was in New York, they were busy with their lives, and we were also very lucky then that our coaches helped take us to some of the events. And that's why I had started with tennis, but I switched to squash because it was much more social, and you'd stay at people's homes and play in these events. And it was a smaller sport then. So I love that piece. I think, so you'd be playing in a squash tournament, staying at someone's house in Philadelphia. And if it snowed, you'd be sledding at night, and then you had your matches in the morning, and it was what it was. Whereas when I played tennis, I had to get public transport. I had to find it. I'm in my little tennis outfit with like one racket, and people would be showing up with their outfits and parents yelling, and the ball would be a foot in, but they'd call it out. No offense to tennis, it's incredibly competitive. And so right away as a kid, I was like, whoa, I really like the social aspect of squash at the time. It was a smaller sport. The social piece of it was really important.
That's fascinating how it influenced your journey and your trajectory into a given sport. And also you're highlighting, I think, through just the way, almost, I suppose, like it evolved naturally. You were sledding one minute, so that multi-sport component, there's a lot of elements, to recognize in your own journey in terms of what the research is now showing, and that actually influenced your own journey significantly. And you've mentioned your coaches there. I'd love to hear how they were a part of that picture.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I am so thankful. And it's funny because I was going to use the word indebted, but that's a heavy word, indebted. We both, I think, benefited greatly from our mutual enjoyment of the sport. I mean, they were able to focus my energy and somehow convince me that going to the squash club, there was this little club where I grew up, and it was like mostly adults. They didn't really have junior programs, and so the club was not doing well. So they had more of a relaunch of, hey, we need members, and we're going to have kids programs. And so the club all of a sudden was booming when a bunch of parents with kids joined. And so it was a gentleman, Fred Weimler, who worked for the Wall Street Journal, was very intellectual, but he loved squash. So he quit the Wall Street, became the coach there. And then he had a young woman join as a coach because there were so many kids, and she became Carol Weimler. And she was a top tennis player at the time, but then moved into coaching, and they just made it fun. Like, we did lots of skills, and we get a little booklet of a skill development. And I just felt so good every time I could check the box. Like, I hit literally the highest level was hitting 1,000 forehands in a row on your forehand side, and then on your backhand, and then forehand volley, backhand volley, alternate volley, forehand, backhand. We played games, we did skill development. But there was such a group of people at the club because we had a pool table, ping pong table, backgammon. We had a little side court that we played basketball on. And that was, we could walk there from school. So yeah, Fred and Carol and that's why Carol started this women's squash tournament called the Heights Casino Open, which when I was number 1, I in the States, I won that event a lot. So when I became head coach at the club and we shifted the game, the USA started playing the international game. So different size court, different ball, different rules. I became the head pro, and we changed the courts to the international courts. And I changed the name of the tournament to the Carol Weimler Open, which was a professional women's event. And so all the friends that I had met playing overseas, I said, come to New York. I'll put you up. I'll feed you. Just come and play this tournament. And that was the first tournament was like $3,000 or $5,000 prize money. Now it's, I don't know what it's up to, 50, or it's not a premier event now, because the premier events are hundreds of thousands prize money.
Wow.
So squash has grown tremendously. But I love the fact that we're 25 years on now that it's the Carol Weimer Open. And when I first started it, the best players in the world came to play. And to me, it's when the young kids can see the higher level athlete and think, wow, I could do that. And then these athletes stayed in their homes and they're like, wow, this is so cool, because this amazing squash player is staying in my home. She's hitting the ball with me. Maybe I could do that, So, a few players continue to play, but more importantly, many of them we follow each other on Instagram, and many of the young ones that I coached or that I played against, we still play squash, and we still enjoy sport. Now it's sea swimming I love, and I've done a few triathlons. That's sort of my new thing, paddle. But to be able to play sport, that's the other thing, I didn't really stress, is when young people are participating in activity and sport, it's a wonderful opportunity to learn something that you can play for your life. It is hard to get, a football game, or you can only play rugby so long. And unfortunately, we didn't have rugby in the US. I think I would have enjoyed playing that if I had a chance. Or a football game, or a soccer game. You need more people. Well, I just need one other person to play squash, 3 other to play paddle. Sea swimming, there's usually a group. It's nice to go out in a group as opposed to yourself, but it's nice to, tennis, like you can play sports. And recently the studies have come out around racket sports. It lengthens your life if you're a racket sport player. It's got a lot going on in terms of the technical, tactical, mental challenges, things like that. But any activity in sport are good. So,
And sets you up for life.
yes.
It's really fascinating, because we have the Paris 2024 Olympics ready to kick off in the coming days. And we know that part of the appeal of the Olympics is the stories and the dreams of these incredible athletes that have journeyed there. And your own story that you've just talked about, from Brooklyn, New York, to playing squash at world-class level and becoming a long-serving executive at the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee, like that journey, your personal motivations, that's an inspirational story. I'd love for you to share a little bit about it, given the Olympic spirit that we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't talk about how one of the things I loved being at the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee is the fact that it's one of the few organizations that we're the Olympic and Paralympic movement in the US. So I worked with a lot of athletes with different disabilities. I got to set up Olympic and Paralympic training sites around the country and learn so much about, people's capacity for learning, developing, playing sport, whatever their ability or disability is. And the other piece, I'd be remiss if I didn't, growing up in Brooklyn and being a young white girl, still growing up in a big multicultural city, I saw at a young age the disparity on opportunity for what culture or maybe what racial and ethnic background you had and what was available to you. So that's always been a really big motivation to me. And I felt very fortunate to have coaches that took me under their wing and focused my energy to play sport. And really so many of the opportunities that I've had in my life. And I do like to speak up. And I've always been like that. For people that are underrepresented or their voice is not in the room. Even a meeting that I had yesterday at Golf Ireland, we're talking about inclusion, and here we are, a group of mostly white people, all white people. And so it's sports. Really, the motivator for me is somehow, for whatever reason, when I was young, I often looked at things and saw what I thought maybe was missing because I felt it young. Like I was the girl playing with the boys. Why are girls playing? You shouldn't be doing this. You play like a boy. You know, so early on, I knew I was different, and later on in life, being LGBTQ plus, I figured that piece out. But early on, it was sport gave me, for me, knowing I was different, but finding something that I was really good at, and sport was that thing. I felt so confident, and that's probably why my confidence and sport got so enmeshed, because it was the area that I felt confident. And my favorite attire was getting on a court and playing, and moving, and all the things that went with it. And every sport, I mean, I just loved every sport. To me, there's a sport and activity for everyone, whether they think they're athletic or sporty or not. I just think it's a wonderful way to have more of a mind body connection, because we know our health and wellness, our body is a huge part of that. Our mental thoughts is a huge part of it. When you get to go for a run or go for a swim or hit a ball or ride a bike, you're focusing on something different. You're trying to do something good for your body. So when you try to connect those two in a really positive way, no matter what, it's healthy, it's good for you. And maybe it can keep more of this dis-ease away. So I do think the whole emotional, mental, spiritual, physical health, we need to have some form of activity, which doesn't mean you have to run 10 miles. You can just be doing yoga for 20 minutes or Pilates or walking, anything just to move. So I've just always, and I've gotten a lot of joy from moving, and I love to dance. I mean, we can't not talk about dancing. So yeah, and sport and my success in sport really enabled me to get the position at the US Olympic Paralympic Committee. And it's the things I learned in sport about speaking up, about trying to put myself forward. I was in plenty of meetings where, I said something that maybe people didn't want to hear, but that was, sport taught me that, and to stand up for myself and to speak up and speak for others. And so today, that's what really moved me into this, now working in this diversity, equity, inclusion space is something I'm so passionate about, because had my coaches not given me the opportunity as to play sport, and maybe my family didn't have the income to play at this high level, squash club, but we figured it out, so that I could play and get to events. And I mean, even one of the first trips to Australia, they helped fund, which I don't know that the other families knew that, but because I was good at it, they helped me. And we have to keep that going, whatever that means. So people with less opportunity, they get a chance, and they get a chance to succeed, because it brings such quality of life, to their lives, to their families. Like if you look at there's this Squash Education Association that has 25 plus programs across the US. And like the Professional Squash Association, the PSA Foundation, there's another 12, I think, globally. But what these programs focus on is making sure that kids, they're motivated to go to school and finish their classes and homework, and then they get to play squash. And the studies are like 95% of the kids in these programs across the US in particular end up finishing high school, going to university, and many of them are not going to be playing squash at a high level, but they're getting their degrees. It's opening up whole opportunities. And these are kids, sometimes the first in their families to graduate from university. And all of a sudden now, all their younger siblings or cousins, the family now has a university graduate, more opportunities. So it then brings that opportunity to the whole family. So it's one person can make a difference. So I've gone on and on about that. So, and go Team Ireland now.
You have talked about actually Radisha and what she's done at Adeleke for Irish athletics. What is your thoughts on that in terms of diversity, inclusion, but just everything for Irish sport? She's our superstar as we head into the Olympics.
Absolutely. one of the things I thought, first of all, what an incredible role model. I just sort of tear up when I think about, the negative things that have been said, which is really disappointing and very sad, just inappropriate things when this young woman has lifted a nation. She has been incredible and she just keeps going. And it was so wonderful when the news came out about, well, we know she gets, there's still discrimination and racism and all of that. So, but there was such support that fought back for her. And one of the things I loved with RTE showing little snippets of young kids at Rashida's school, where Rashida went to school in Tala, talking about what a role model she is. White boys, white girls, people from different racial and ethnic backgrounds. She is an Irish champion. She is a shero, and she's lifting up people because of what she succeeded, despite the discrimination and racist abuse that she's gotten online in particular. And so what I love about Ireland and what I hope we continue to see here in Ireland is people fighting back against this group of people that somehow is being corralled to be more discriminatory in a multitude of ways right now in Ireland. And hopefully communities will keep pushing that group of people away from the things they're doing, which is against different racial and ethnic minorities, asylum seekers, migrants. It's not fair. So back to Rashida, incredible. If she wins a medal, doesn't win a medal, the fact that she is representing Ireland and is in the highest level of the toughest sport is incredible. It's incredible. I love it. I love it. It's incredible. So good for her.
At such a young age as well. It was in the lead up to the Olympics. It's tough as an athlete, just that alone, not to mention dealing with this kind of vitriol. What would you say to her? Like if you could talk to her, what would you say to her? Given all your experience and all the challenges you've encountered, and what she's encountered now, what would you say to Rashida?
I would say, particularly going into the Olympics, is just be in the moment as much as you can. It's it on a daily basis. It's so hard not to think of, oh, what I could have or should have done, or oh, what I need to do, or what's going to happen, or oh my gosh, we can get into worry, or oh, I should have. But the hardest thing, really, for any of us, but particularly at someone the highest competitive athlete, is to just be in that moment and try to do what you've done before every competition. Do the same thing. You prepare the same way, you have the same foods, you have the same music, and the mental preparation and the physical preparation. What often people do is, because it's an Olympics or a Paralympics, they might change something. And that's where, you don't want to all of a sudden change the attire or the shoes or I know one time we had an athlete who was really struggling with a hamstring, and she had always taken different medications for it, but she took, in a leave that day or something, and she cramped. And she was in the lead and then lost. So I feel terrible saying that example, but so Rashida, just you have achieved so much already, and just really relish the moment of trying to do things the same way and enjoy the experience. Sprint with a smile. I don't know where I heard that. It was recently, I think in some athletic performance, someone was talking about, like Alcaraz, who just won Wimbledon. How many times he goes for a shot, maybe he shouldn't have because he was, not being mature or something. But then he smiles, and that pressure sort of dissipates and he's back focused the next point, she's been an incredible role model. And she has her whole life to compete. So there's no shoulds, just live in that moment and do the best you can on the day. And we're all cheering for you, whatever happens.
Love it. Echoing that, echoing that. As we wrap up and kind of close up here, I'm really curious to maybe just dive into a little bit more on, you have such that unique perspective on Irish culture, youth sports culture, and the US Youth Olympic or US youth sports ecosystem. Not everything may be applicable, but what might they be able to learn that you've come across that could be applicable?
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of the things I think that's really different is in the US, I find that there is incredible pressure to succeed. Now, to me, what often that is in the US is, you have to win at something, whether you win the debate or you win the sport event or you win, um, I get the degree from this particular school because it's the best, or this sense of having to be so good at something. Now, what I love about Ireland is people still are trying to be the best, achieve the best, but they're living life more on a daily basis, like enjoy life. Let's have a longer lunch. Let's just, go for a drive around the hill of Howth just to see the view today. It Everything doesn't have to be planned and scheduled to the degree it is. I mean, young people today, and what from when I was a kid playing at the Heights Casino to then, we played stickball, stoop ball, and made up games on the street. I think you still have that in Ireland. You still have people pick up games. Let's go to the pitch. Let's kick the ball around. There's a little bit more playfulness, silliness. In the US, it's gotten very intense, very serious, very young. Like you have to be in this pathway. And I think it's too intense. The people are into the sport, I think, because they love it, so whether, it's the person's a sailing champion or Israel who went to UCD, you have to really love your sport to continue it. Now the university will still support you. And then of course, if you move on, Sport Ireland, it's because, and I also think it's a huge difference between, Ireland, US, and also Europe, US, is in the US, sport is not supported by the government. So sport, I think, naturally might have more pressure because there's sort of sponsors behind you. You have to get funding for things. If you look at the American football system, with cable networks and the money that's in American football, you have your university or college football coach is making more than the president of the university. Now, that's an interesting statement. Now, what I'd like to see, if that continues to happen, all of those people on that American football team should graduate from school, but sometimes they don't because the sport becomes more important than their education. Now, to me, in Ireland, education is so important because if you look at the GAA, those athletes are like professional athletes, but technically they're amateur because they're not paid. They're still, many of them are then working, still having to train all week. So the system, just bottom line, one word to the other, is I think people in Ireland have much more a sense of enjoying life more. If I love my sport, I'm going to give it a go, which is wonderful, but it's okay if I don't. In the US, there's this intense, I have to be the best and I am going to go for it. And if I fail, I failed. It's almost too intense. Whereas in Ireland, there's a little bit more support. Education's more supported, healthcare.
Right.
So this pressure to succeed in the US is, I think, and again, success depends how we measure it, but I like to measure it and trying to be healthy and well and giving back to our communities and being good citizens, knowing our neighbors.
Right.
My
Okay.
dream in Ireland is all of a sudden these big sport complexes, starting at Sport Ireland in Abbottstown or Blanchardstown, has a diversity day, which starts to generate more interest and feeling of belonging and welcoming for all the different populations that are in Ireland now, and where you get to try all these different sports. Now, they're currently, I mean, Sport Ireland does a ton of wonderful work on so many levels, whether it's officials training, coaches training, guidelines around diversity inclusion, to safeguarding, to they have camps, it's, you know, the events, and there's constantly things going on around there to inspire the nation. I would just like to, what would be incredible is if public transportation was able to get there.
Right.
So the accessibility right now is difficult in that space. And I think there's more opportunity here because the partnerships, again, because Sport Ireland supporting the national governing bodies that work with the local sport partnerships, that work with the councils,
Right.
and together that brings the funding and the coaching and the expertise to run events that everyone can participate in. And the recent women in sport programs have been incredible and brought so many more women into sport and activity just to try different sports. And I'd love to see that around the country at different complexes. If we look at the pool complexes, so in Belfast and Limerick, in Dublin, and then some of the bigger fields, is having continuing to introduce young people to sport, working with the schools. Because if you have, I mean, if you look at physical education, if schools, if you have your program, which talks, which is about motor skill development, enjoying it, challenges and things like that. And then if you have different sports coming in, like say canoe comes in one week and saying, okay, we're going to go kayak this week, just to learn that skill. Obviously you need, the safeguarding in place, the water safety, all those type of things. And then another week volleyball comes in and you get to try volleyball. That would be incredible for school programs. A great example is Oklahoma City. There was a group that created a coalition, Oklahoma City Sports Coalition. Now, so you had the University of Central Oklahoma, Oklahoma University. You had business leaders. So you had the public sector, private sector, sports sector, university sector, schools, meaning not the university, but the grammar high school. And they all came together to figure out what can we do in our community? So what was amazing is being involved with public officials, they were able to pass a bill that helped 5 different initiatives. So it was young people, older people, it had arts and culture in there. So when this passed and funding was put into develop the river that was there that they would mow throughout the year, they were able to dam it up, create a world-class rowing venue, because they also got corporate funding behind this. It's a world-class rowing venue. They've hosted world competitions. So just think of the economic development for sport events. Now, University of Central Oklahoma and Oklahoma University have rowing teams. The USA Rowing, they train their smaller boats there. And now there's a biking path around there. You cross the bridge. There's a walking path. You can rent bikes there. So it's created a boom for the downtown Oklahoma City area by the river, and sports and wellness and activity. They became an Olympic training site and Paralympic training site because of what they did as a group to develop sport at the highest level, the middle level, creating university programs, working with schools, and then anybody can access those facilities.
That's incredible. Okay, quick fire round. First thing that comes to mind. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
What is the best advice for parents of young kids in youth sports?
Put yourself in their shoes, breathe, enjoy, be positive.
Love it. Love it. What's a negative message that perhaps parents of kids in sport may be listening to?
Um, they're listening to who they think they should be as a parent or who they think they should be as the child playing sport. Everyone has a different level of expertise as a parent or expertise as a kid playing sport. Everyone learns at their own level. Just let them be themselves. Let them be themselves and quiet it down. Have fun. Enjoy it.
Love it. What's the biggest blind spot the sports industry has around youth sports?
Um, if we can keep making it about fun, health, and wellness, and how lucky we are to have the opportunity to play, and we want everyone to have that opportunity, and so many people do not. Imagine if every time we played, we had to bring a friend with us or bring someone who didn't have the opportunity to play with us. Let's open up the game. There's never enough people, as opposed to minimizing it and making it just about, who can afford to play.
Love it. To create the future fans of movement and play that we talk about, the sports industry should pay attention to.
I think playing sport, there's going to be your highest elite level of any sport, and this is the rules and how it's played. Make up fun adjustments to a game. When I was coaching squash, okay, today we're going to play lefty, or today we're going to build an obstacle course in the squash court that we have to run around, or we're going to put hoops on the wall and try to throw the ball in the hoop. Just, or in badminton, sometimes, everyone wants to play on the appropriate badminton court. It's okay to play in the grass. You're getting people to play badminton. Yeah, just make up the rules sometimes and have fun with it. Get the ball after 2 bounces is fine.
Brilliant. And final question. The future of sport is?
The future of sport is I still think sport can be a game changer. Sport can bring people together. The future of sport, I hope, will bring communities together so that we can focus on our similarities as human beings and not our differences. It's a really critical time. There's a lot of turmoil in the world.
Right.
And as we know, Mandela said and Mandela did, and it was just Mandela Day. Let's help sport unite us as opposed to divide us.
On that note, Alicia, what a pleasure it's been to sit and chat with you today. I've just had such a great time, and I could continue for hours, I think, with you. I really appreciate the time you've given and how much you've given to sports and the influence you've had over decades, not alone just in your sporting career, but what you've done in shaping the US landscape and now in Ireland. And I know from a personal point of view, I want to thank you for your mentorship and just, leading the way in changing and positively shaping how we can make sports that we've all benefited from as athletes and how we can make it better for the next generation. So thank you so much for this conversation. And I would absolutely love for listeners to point people in your direction. Where can we point them if they'd like to find out more about you and your work that you're doing?
Absolutely. Contact me at Alicia at diversitysportsolutions.ie, or look at my website, diversitysportsolutions.ie. But I do want to thank you for everything you're doing, because it really takes a lot of time and energy to go sort of against the grain. You're trying to create space around this whole play for people who maybe don't always take to it right away, and the physical literacy and letting people share their thoughts and ideas like you let me do today. So thank you so much for that. and really appreciate the time to chat to you and Kuul Sports, everyone. Do it, follow it, make it happen.
I love it. On that note, Alicia, thank you so much. We will point everyone in your direction, and I hope we'll have a conversation again very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.